Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Silver Years. My name is DK, and I'm very happy to be here. And I humbly thank you for joining me. Today, I want to talk about remembering who we are, remembering why we're here, remembering the magic we possess within, remembering our real story so that we're no longer misled by his story and its false narrative, remembering beyond the limitations this life presents. For many of us living the silver years, and I'm going to add, in spite of the social revolution of the 1960s, we were raised and well trained to spend our lives trying to conform to the societal norms we were taught to be dependent upon. We were trained not to stand out, be too different, or question the authority that sets the limits around us. We were trained for success, predominantly in the corporate world and the W 2 realm of being an employee. We were trained to be perfect in all that we do and choose. Yet, somehow, the standards that define what success is or what perfection is were rarely questioned or challenged in our compliance and obedience to the agreed upon rules established in advance. And the compliance training we received growing up was usually rooted in fear of being an outcast, fear of being ostracized, fear of failure, fear of divine punishment, fear of poverty, fear of not being loved. I imagine most of us have heard the saying, the tallest blade of grass is the first to get cut. Now, this cautionary metaphor is usually only spoken in warning to those who dare to stand above the crowd in order to see beyond the crowd. There comes a time in the experience of many of us, I think, when the fears that kept us small, the fears that kept us limited, the fear of losing something we believed we couldn't live without begin to fade just a bit. Now, for me, I found those fears of standing tall began to dwindle somewhat as the hustle and bustle of survival while raising a family curtailed right alongside my career. Maybe this has been your experience as well. I was trained to I was trained to believe growing up that my value was in the work I produced and the money that came as a result. My work was my identity. And when the work I was doing to make the money I needed to survive was not congruent with who I was inside, my life began to crumble and break down from the inside out. And trust me, I have had a few dramatic meltdown moments and corporate job walkouts throughout my life. Had I better listened to the whisper of my inner voice, and the bricks that followed may not have hit with such brutal force, perhaps. It's hard to say in hindsight, and at this point, it really doesn't matter anymore. It was what it was, and it got me to where I am today, and I'm good with that. Although I wasn't fully aware of it at the time, my life altering breakdown process began in earnest when I moved to Montana in 1992. I was in my 30s, and some astrologers would call this my Saturn return phase. Okay, well, it was. The book I wrote, Living the Big Sky Life, is a memoir of that shift point based on my perceptions at the time. It was this traumatic shift point that triggered me enough to awaken and consciously begin the process of remembering. So, what did my process of remembering look like? Well, the starting point, I feel, began with a couple of wise words chiseled onto the ancient temple of Apollo in Delphi, Greece: know thyself. The beginning is always with the self. It is within us. It begins and ends with you. Well, this necessitates that we have a sentient level of self awareness and introspection. You know, have the ability to have an honest conversation with yourself about who you are, what you want, and why you're here. Or simply have a desire to ask the deeper questions no one around you is willing to ask. By having the conversation, by asking the questions, we open up and allow our universe to bring us the answers we seek. This can be a very scary thing because to delve into the deeper and more hidden aspects of our inner selves, we run the risk of being made uncomfortable, sometimes really uncomfortable, because we may not like the answers the universe is providing in response to our questions, or we may not like the awful way it might make us feel inside at first glance. Yet, in order to really know myself, I had to swim in those dark waters of my unconscious and that secret shadow side of me that I didn't even know was there until I dove in. Why was I the way I was? And is that all that I am? Now, please know there is no quick fix here. There is no one and done with this. Knowing thyself is a life's work that gets easier with time invested in self discovery, but it is the work of a lifetime. And it's never too late to begin. And for whatever it's worth, change will always be the outcome. Always. Now, I have to say for me that separating my identity from the work I did or the title I called myself based on that work was one of the hardest and most emotionally depressing aspects I had to contend with at the onset of my journey. It took years to pry away the layers of that programming. It was deeply, deeply ingrained, deeply enmeshed with my value as a being and my right to be alive. Work was my purpose, and without it, I felt I had little value unless I was a workhorse. Not truth, but I believed it was true. Wow. I can really see that big lie in the middle of believe right now. Can you? During the years that followed my wake up call in Montana over 3 decades ago, I was drawn to explore the occult as a way to better understand myself through the wisdom of ancient modalities. Now, as an aside, occult only means secret and hidden, which is not an evil thing unto itself, as it is so often portrayed. I did have a long and illustrious background connected to an assortment of religions that ended before I moved to Montana in 1992. And when my consciousness began to expand, I had no interest in keeping my research confined to the theological realm of any religious belief system and its dogma. Suffice to say, I was done with religion by that time. And while we're remembering, remember, too, to each his own when it comes to the voyage of self exploration. What worked for me may or may not work for you. Please use your own good judgment and what resonates with you in your personal soul growth when traveling your own path of remembering who you are. I am only sharing my journey as a way to support you on that path should you find it useful. Please take from this what helps you, what resonates with you, and discard the rest. You know what you need. Trust that. After my Montana shakeup, I spent decades immersed in the esoteric sciences of shamanism, tarot, runes, numerology, astrology, Reiki, past life regression, channeling, symbology, just to name a few. Now, I found these ancient modalities extremely helpful when it came to better understanding myself through the wisdom they offered while not attaching myself to being an official practitioner of any of them. Astrology was not a science I was strongly attracted to initially. I always thought I knew just enough to be dangerous. Not true entirely. But I did know several amazing astrologers that changed my life. In fact, the very first serious astrology reading I had was around 1995 from an incredible astrologer and dear friend from Denver, who is sadly no longer with us. She mailed me this hour-long cassette tape to my home in Montana that I played in my car for years until I about wore it out. It was, hands down, one of the best investments I had made in remembering who I was and what I was about. It opened me up to things I felt deep inside but could never manage to access. It was a true gift and positive life changer, without a doubt. My next big expansion came in the form of a vision while I was driving into Los Angeles on a work assignment. I think this was around 1999. I suspect I may have lost some time in that experience because I have no memory of the miles that passed during the vision, which basically saw me with healing light energy coming out of my hands. I had my hands on the steering wheel and I could see this light coming out of my hands. I held them up. It was really interesting. Now I had no idea at the time what it was or what it meant, but it didn't take me very long to find out. It makes me think of that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Because one evening after work, I had gone with my sister to a past life regression class offered by the local Learning Light Foundation. The facilitator of this class was also a shaman and a Reiki master teacher, which I did not know before coming to the class. When I told her about my vision at the end of the regression, she immediately knew that what I saw was connected to Reiki healing energy coming from the hands. So, the next several years saw me initiated through the levels up to Reiki master, using shamanism as my basis for training and other techniques tied to the shamanic journey. Now, in this experience, I learned to channel and walk between the worlds in a confident and protected way. During this time frame, I also met a friend and fellow author Richard King, who is a world-renowned numerologist and the author of basically an encyclopedia on numerology. This is where I learned firsthand the power of frequencies as interpreted through numbers. About 10 years later, my consciousness expanded even further and went galactic when Richard decided to publish the Galactic Transcripts. And he asked me to assist with the editing and contribution of the forward introduction, which I was proud to do. I was honored to do it. Now, I've included Richard's websites below for anyone interested in exploring numerology or reading the transcripts. It was worth the exploration for me, and maybe it will be for you too. So, where am I today in my quest of remembering who I am? The short answer, well, is still a work in progress. However, this channel, much to my surprise, is helping me heal in ways I never expected just by doing the writing and creating these videos that I share with you. I never expected that. Now, I know that I'm not for everyone. I never have been. In fact, I had an old grade school friend tell me how weird I was just a few years ago. She looked at me, "Oh, you're so weird," she said. I just smiled at her and said, "Uh-huh." Because you know what? By her standards, I am weird. I recognize that who I am today no longer conforms to what is expected from a person living the silver years from her perspective. And that's okay. What I know is that I am who I am today in this now moment. I am. And being authentic and true to that has value because it's the best I have to offer at any given moment. The best I have to offer myself, the best I have to offer others. And what I have to offer is a result of my experiences and the wisdom I've gained from those experiences, which I've chosen to share. in the hopes that it might support or assist others on the path to remembering who they are. You are worth it. Now, in closing, I'd like to leave you with a question, like I do, something to ponder. Do you remember how magnificent you are? Please leave your comments below. I would love to hear your stories. Until next time, be well, choose love, and thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.